Hi, everyone. Welcome to the actual versus budget lecture, where we are going to discuss overcoming a broken budget. Our goals for this lecture are basically what a broken budget looks like, dealing with the unexpected, and how to overcome the setbacks. So let's first take a look at what a broken budget is. It's basically when your expenses are greater than your income. Now, it can look basically a broken budget can look two different ways. Before you actually set your monthly budget, like you've balanced it and everything is good for the month, you've got it all in there. This is what it can look like when it's broken before you actually decide it's good. You in your remainder line, you have a negative. We've discussed this before. It's that red parentheses negative. Basically, we've got more expenses than we have income. It can also look like this after, our budget's already set. We're already going in through our month, and something's happened. We've got an expense we weren't expecting. This can create a broken budget. Now, if we take a look at that before situation, we basically have our budget moderately set. We want to go ahead and say, okay, it's good, but we've got a negative in that remainder column. We can ask ourselves a couple of questions to try to remedy this fact, such as, is your income high enough to cover your mandatory expenses? If you've literally wiped out everything, meaning you don't have a personal budget, you are literally living off the bare minimum you can for food, your gas expenses as least as it can be, you're basically not paying anything that you don't absolutely have to live. Is your income high enough to cover your expenses? Because if you're in that situation and you still have that negative, chances are your income is not high enough for what you need in order to live. So a couple things we can do is finding an additional or a higher paying job. That's pretty obvious. Most people think of that. You can get a part-time job or, mow the neighbor's lawn, whatever you need to do to come up with a little extra income every month to be able to help compensate for that negative remainder. You can also consider changing your way of living. This could mean moving into a less expensive home or moving in with family even, or even just getting a roommate. So what we want to do in order to get that balanced budget is basically to make lifestyle changes to lower our expenses or raise our income. We also look at making alterations to our budget and make sure that our remainder line is in the positive. Otherwise, it's not a balanced budget, it's broken. And also, we want to make sure we're sticking to your budget going forward. So if we can abide by these three things, we can avoid that broken budget situation. And then just as I've said in previous lectures, make sure you're evaluating your budget as you go throughout the month. Check your bank account. Look for those things that are unexpected or that are different than we have planned, and make those changes as soon as you can. We're going to look a lot at that in this particular portion, where we're looking at the after situation. So we've already set our balanced budget. It was balanced when we started the month, and some things happened, come through our bank account we weren't expecting, and now we have a situation where our expenses are now greater than our income. So we're looking at dealing with the unexpected. That situation is, can I make more income to cover this added expense? That's always the first thing I look at, because I like my budget the way it is. I like my quality of living the way I like to live, and I set that in my budget. So the first thing I want to look at is, okay, is there any income at all that I can bring in? Can I sell something to get enough money to pay for this, in this situation, $80 charge? Or can I go mow 5 lawns, or whatever it is, to be able to compensate for that extra cost that I didn't have balanced in my budget. That's always what I want to start with. And if there's just really not, or you're not in a place where you can earn extra income, then we want to move on. We want to look at, what am I willing to give up to cover this cost? So that means changing those other expenses section of our budget that were the more flexible to compensate. So that could be lowering your personal budget, or spending less on food, or in this situation, you could even look at not paying as much of an additional amount on debt. So if you're paying above and beyond the minimum amount, which you always want to make sure you're doing, you can say, okay, I'm not going to pay quite as much so that I can pay for this extra expense. And that's just another way. But if you're paying the minimum amount, you want to always pay that. Don't just like forego making your payment that month or making too less, because then you'll end up with a fee on there and we're in a bigger situation. So obviously, once we've made those determinations of what we're going to change, we're literally going to go back into our budget and make those alterations now, so that as we go throughout the month, if we need to catch things or change things, we can. So we basically are looking for that black number instead of the red number to have our balanced budget, because we want a balanced budget at every stage of the game throughout the month. And we can't just look at what it looks like at the beginning of the month and saying, okay, as long as I abide by this, we'll be good. And then look at it at the end of the month and you're like, what happened? I have all these fees. I have all this like situation where I don't have enough money to eat. I don't have enough money to pay this bill. What happened? Well, sometime along the way that you didn't catch, by checking your bank account, something happened, something came out, you spent more than you were supposed to, or like we'd looked at, a transaction came through that you weren't expecting, that wasn't in your budget. So it's important to, on a daily or at least an every other day basis, to take a look at your bank account, cross-check it with your budget, and make sure if there's any changes you need to make them then. So let's take a look at some setbacks that we can have for a broken budget and how to overcome them. So in the situation of that extra expense that came through, this can cause overdraft fees, return check fees, late fees, basically added extra fees, which can also add to however much you owe here. So if this happened to catch you at the end of the month, whenever you were really, really strict to your budget and you were great until that last day and this came through, you're going to be in the negative in your bank account if it went through. If you have overdraft protection, it's going to be in the negative, and you're going to have the cost of the fee for an overdraft fee. So, or it could be a return check fee that you now owe, the business that you wrote the check to, which hopefully if you wrote a check, that would have been in your budget, because you don't want to just write checks and, you don't have the money in there. But basically, there are added fees that can add on top of however much you needed for that expense you weren't expecting. So it can be a huge deal. So let's look at a couple of things we can do, when we are faced with a situation of an extra fee or and now extra fee and the cost of that extra expense that we weren't counting for. We can add the fee and or the extra expense into next month's budget. So if you don't have overdraft protection, the charge was sent back to the company, now you have a return fee, you've got the added fee of the cost and a late fee, you've got all these fees and the amount that you owed originally. We can add that into our budget for next month and then compensate and just make that added additional payment on top of what we would normally already owe for that month. So that's a way to do it. I usually try to find a way, if possible, within the same budget, monthly budget, to deal with the things that happen within that month. So you're not messing up next month's budget. But if you're in a pinch, it is a possibility to do this. So after you add that expense, you would just basically balance your budget like normal. So, in my opinion, try to stay within each month and make the compensations you can to deal with that monthly budget versus looking at next month and saying, okay, well, I'm going to just push that added fee into next month, because then you're going to be shorting yourself in areas that maybe you can't afford to basically short yourself in the next month. So that's a way to really get yourself behind and get yourself in trouble and not really be able to dig yourself out of a hole in your budget. So if it comes down to it, you can do it this way, but I recommend trying to compensate in other ways in the month that it actually happens within that budget, and hopefully you won't even run into this situation where you have extra fees, but if it does happen, you now know how to handle it. So let's take a look at our lecture goals and make sure we actually completed everything we're supposed to do. First of all, what is a broken budget and what does it look like? So obviously we answered that one. Dealing with the unexpected, obviously dealing with those transactions we weren't expecting to come through, and then how to overcome the setbacks. You know, setbacks are more of like dealing with the aftermath of not catching something or realizing a transaction came through and now you have extra fees. We definitely completed that one as well. So congratulations, you've completed this lecture. Let's look at what the next lecture brings. We're basically going to discuss reducing costs, which is basically controlling your debt and expenses. So there's a lot of really good information coming up. I think this may be my favorite lecture coming up. So make sure you take a look at it. And I hope you guys have really enjoyed this. Be sure to message me if you have any questions along the way. I'd love to answer them. And I will see you in the next lecture. Bye, guys.